Welcome back to the Rhody Beat Report. My name is Peter Gigliotti. Joining me on the desk today are Zach Petrick, Justin Therio, and Alexa Baker. We've got a great episode for you all today discussing URI's homecoming win against Maine, our game reaction and analysis as per usual, how URI is becoming a football school, and our breakdown ahead of our matchup against Monmouth. Make sure to stay tuned for a great episode here on the Rhody Beat Report.
Last week, we discussed how the Rhode Island Rams had to keep destiny in their own hands with a decisive win over Maine. On Saturday, the Rams got that done 24-14. Here's how they got it done. First quarter, tight end Cooper Hazy, 7-yard touchdown from Carter Peavy. That made it 7-0 Maine in the first quarter. So Maine, they got out to that lead. We've seen teams take the lead on Rhode Island a bunch of times. They've come back a lot this year. Maine, they moved the ball down the field, capitalizing on the dink and dunk plays, and then They ran the no huddle to make those dink and dunk plays happen. Then 44-yard reception from Leo Irfin to set up the touchdown. That was the key play on that drive, and that was the reason that they were able to take that 7-0 lead, the only score in the first quarter.
Yeah, and then Rhode Island, like you said, oftentimes has found themselves playing from behind, and they were able to tie it up with a Devin Farrell 1-yard touchdown run from the goal line. It was a nice read option play where both ends collapsed in on the running back, giving Devin the open lane to practically walk into the end zone. It was a well-designed play. So Rhode Island had finally broke through with some explosive plays. It was a 42-yard catch from Marquise Buchanan, setting them up on the Maine Black Bears 7-yard line. And then with about a minute left in the first half, another touchdown run from Farrell, this time from 6 yards out. Once again, pretty much the same exact play call. Another read option. Maine did not learn their lesson, collapsing in on the running back, giving Devin, once again, a very easy jog into the end zone. And then the third quarter, it was pretty uneventful. The Rams left plenty of points on the board, having to punt from midfield in what was a field position battle. And then once again, it set it up a high stakes for the fourth quarter kids that is this Rhode Island Rams team.
Yeah, and the fourth quarter didn't get off to a great start for Rhode Island. Running back Brian Santana Fist, a 4-yard touchdown run for Maine. That made it 14-14 early in the fourth quarter. It was like right after the break between the two quarters, 14:56 remaining in the game. So Maine wasted no time. They tied the contest right away in that fourth quarter. But then the Rams, talk about the fourth quarter kids. Running back Malik Grant with the 1-yard touchdown run. That made it 21-14. The Rams, they responded right away. They saw what Maine could do on the offense, not tie up that game at 14 apiece. Rams came right back with that go-ahead touchdown. It was set up by a massive momentum-shifting 46-yard reception from the fan-favorite wide receiver, Tommy Smith, who did a great job getting him, brought the Rams down the field. And then Rhode Island, in that fourth quarter, they have the touchdown lead. Then with 6 minutes to go, Ty Groff makes the real decider there late in the game. 35-yard field goal. That was the next drive for the Rams after Maine fell short of scoring. The Rams chipped away at the clock using that ground game before getting into field goal position, and Ty Groff knocked it through thanks to a wild catch by Tommy Smith that came off the foot of Amari Walker and deflected straight up in the air. That pass fell incomplete. Groff might have been out of his range. It was, I think it would have been 4th and 10. Instead, a few yards chipped away by that deflection, the crazy play. Smith makes the catch. 4th and 5, I believe it was, sets up the field goal. Groff knocks it through, and that ends up being your final score, 24-14.
And I think a lot of what you talked about, Zach, is the reason why we kind of label this Rhode Island team as these fourth quarter kids, right? You have a really good ground game that when you're ahead, it makes it really easy to run down that clock. Your special teams unit has executed very well this season. I mean, it genuinely might be one of the best special teams units in the entire nation. Definitely in the CAA, it seems to be the best. And then we've certainly seen Rhode Island get their fair share of lucky plays in the season, and somehow they always, manage to happen in the fourth quarter. So this Rhode Island team, this fourth quarter for them this year has really just been where they've excelled, and it really is the way the team is designed, from the running game to the special teams.
Now that we've had a few days to digest and bask in the Rams' sixth straight victory, let's go over some game reaction and analysis from our homecoming victory against Maine. Now, first of all, this team is firing on all cylinders. Offense, run game, I believe the Rams ran for 119 yards compared to Maine's 57. 3 rushing touchdowns from a multitude of people. I believe it was Malik Grant and Devin Farrell. Maine outgained URI through the air, but per play average, URI had 15.5. Maine only had about 9.5, right? Penalties were kept to an absolute minimum. Total for the Rams, the entire game was only 6, 3 per side. Now, here are the two biggest things, the biggest takeaways for me. 4 for 4 on red zone scoring opportunities. That is huge, especially heading into big games against Monmouth, Delaware, and Albany down the line. But the biggest thing for me is our defensive line finally got the production that we've been looking for all season. How many times have we said this Rams defense has a potential to be one of the best in the CAA? Probably 10, 20, maybe even times, right? But this Rams defense racked up 6 sacks. That is ridiculous. Absolutely crucial for this victory. A big thing, though, I believe, was the offense. Alexi, you want to talk about that?
Yeah, it was a huge day for the offense. It was an overall team win on Saturday from the offense. No individual efforts really stood out, but quarterback Devin Farrell was 13 for 24 for 202 passing yards, 9 rush attempts, and 19 rushing yards with 2 touchdowns, which was awesome. And running back Malik Grant did have 22 attempts for 87 rushing yards and 1 rushing touchdown. And the wide receiver quartet of Marquise Buchanan, Tommy Smith, Sean Harris Jr., and Greg Gaines III all combined for 12 receptions and 186 receiving yards. We did have some notable receptions in big moments from Buchanan, Smith, and Harris Jr.
Yeah, and the only reason that we saw those 3 rushing touchdowns and all those big contributions from the wide receivers is just because of how great the offensive line has been for a long time now. It's been 12 straight quarters without a sack. That's like almost unbelievable.
That is actually crazy.
I meant like that's crazy. You haven't allowed a sack since October 5th. Next time this team plays will be in November. That's wild. So it's great to see that this unit that has had to step in and replace a bunch of guys who graduated last year, went on to the next level, be able to step in. And we talked about early in the season that we knew the talent was on that line, but it was going to take a little bit for them to gel. I mean, and you see that at any level of the sport, whether it's high school or even the professional level. The talent can be there, but it is going to take some time for these guys to learn how to play with each other, because it's a 5-man unit. And just like in basketball or any other sport, communication is key on the offensive line. And after all these weeks, we have finally seen this offensive line kind of reach its peak, and it's been a really impressive performance. And I think it's a huge reason why we've seen the run game be so successful towards the end of the game, and why Devin Farrell has become such a monster, I should say, at the goal line in those rushing situations.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And then, you talk about one side of the line. What about the other side? The defensive line is they're really turning it up. So the pressures are now turning into sacks for that group. All season long, the Rams have gotten after the quarterback. This week, they finally turned those quarterback hits into sacks. So multiple Rams with sacks. Carson Primrose had 2. A.J. Pena with 1. Kareem Wilson with 1. Devin Hightower with 1. And quarterback Braden Price with 1. And Malachi Burby also had a QB hit. They're really getting after the quarterback now. But so you talk about one side, protect the quarterback. On the other side, it's get after the quarterback. Go and get that guy. Make sure that they have no chance of, moving the ball through the air. Make them move the ball on the ground. And as Peter mentioned, they didn't move the ball on the ground at all. I believe it was like 1.9 yards per rush.
1.9 yards
per rush. With 59 total yards on the ground. So if you're getting to the quarterback, not allowing them to move the ball through the air, that forces them to run. And with the run defense that we know the Rams have, done a great job. The Rams counted for 7 tackles for loss as well. So that's just, that group has done a great job. Now both lines really stepping it up, and that's the reason this Rams team was undefeated in October.
Yeah, you talk about the pressure, and one thing that I wanted to harp on right there is, one, it's great that the pressure rate that we talked about earlier in the season is now actually converting into sacks, because there are people out there, not myself, but there are football nerds out there who argue that a sack is just as valuable as an interception at times.
So people say it's not more valuable.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, Peter, you understand the argument I'm making. Like, depending on the situation, if it's a 3rd down, if it's a 2nd and 12, that sack can completely change a drive, knock a team out of field goal range.
It's a drive killer.
It is a drive killer in many ways. And knowing the team, talking to coaches in the spring, I remember they talked a lot about they want to generate pressure using the defensive backs. And deep into the season, right, we are continuing to see that happen. We saw it happen early in the season, and you worry maybe at this point they might get away from that. But no, they continue to get sacks and pressures and quarterback hits with their defensive backs. So you kind of leave those quarterbacks on edge at times, because they never know, and they're going to turn around, and all of a sudden some guy who's capable of running a 4.4 is just closing in on them, and they have no way to avoid them. So it's great to see this team draw up the pressures from a schematic standpoint, and then also the players themselves finally making these big-time plays.
Yeah, definitely. The defensive front's going to be one of the biggest units moving forward, in my opinion. I know we have our Monmouth breakdown later on in the show, but I think heading into Monmouth, an offense that's so lethal, our pass rush is certainly going to be one of the most important units. But an important unit this week was our special teams. A big shout-out to freshman Gage Hinckley. This is a crazy play. We were talking about it before the show. It was an onside kick attempt, I believe, right? Bounced off of Moses Muse, caught in the air, pop flied all the way up. It was really a game-saving play from Hinckley. So shout out to Hinckley. All right, we'd now like to welcome to the desk in-house analyst Kyle Reel.
Thank you, Peter. Appreciate that. Welcome to Halloween week, Rhody Nation. The Rhode Island Rams are coming off of an undefeated month in October with new challenges lying ahead during Halloween weekend. As the Rams chase excellence, the team needs to lock in. As we said for weeks now, the team controls its own destiny. Head coach Jim Fleming noted during CAA coaches conference on Monday how memorable the games played in November are, and the Rams have matchups against Monmouth, Delaware, UAlbany, and Bryant to close out the regular season. The Rams defense must continue to scare opponents in the backfield in order to cause further nightmares in the passing game, as we hopefully see the team begin to force more turnovers. And offensively, the Rams must continue to stay out of the internal haunted house, as they've made significant progress in limiting the mental errors that kicked themselves in the foot during the first half of the season. If Rhody can do all of this, the Rams will eliminate their past demons.
So we welcome to the table one of our Rhody front office and team members and analysts, Emily Lanzarone. She's been on the show a couple of times now, so we're going to have her on to talk about rankings, whether it's the media poll or the coaches poll. So we'll get into that now.
Gladly. As we've discussed in weeks past, the poll voters remain pretty wary of Rhode Island in the grand scheme of things. The Rams remain the lowest ranked one-loss team in the Stats Perform Top 25 and second lowest ranked team in the AFCA coaches poll among those with just one loss. Yet, once again, in a week with few changes, at the top, Rhode Island moves up to 14th in both poll systems. Rams rank ahead of CAA foes Richmond, Stony Brook, and William & Mary in the Stats Perform Top 25, only tailing behind Villanova, who is ranked 13th. Rams rank ahead of Stony Brook in the coaches poll, but trail directly behind Richmond at 12th and Villanova at 13th. Considering the Rams' strength of schedule, the team simply needs to continue taking care of business week in and week out, with their only ranked matchup of the regular season likely being the team's win over New Hampshire.
Yeah, New Hampshire will likely not finish the season ranked, so at the end of the day, with Delaware being barred from the rankings because of their impending move to the FBS level, Rhode Island's strength of schedule is going to likely look very weak, and I think you're right, Emily, that's a big reason as to why they've been wary of Rhode Island. But there's a lot to talk about with these rankings, and I've personally gone on my own rant on Twitter, but I'm happy to repeat them here on Rhody Beat Report, because I think it is a little bit ridiculous. I think that you can partially blame the CAA for the way that they've handled realignment with who they've added to the conference. It's so kind of bloated now, kind of reminds you of those old 1990s Mountain West conference, right, where there might be a handful of really good teams, but a lot of bad teams. So Rhode Island it's not their fault that they're not scheduled to play the good teams. They've been scheduled to play the lesser teams of the CAA, and now they're being punished by it. So, and my other real notable point, and maybe we'll get into a little bit more, is I just cannot believe that Villanova's ahead of Rhode Island. I simply can't, and maybe you guys will agree with me.
It really doesn't make sense actually when you look at it,
yeah.
But
I mean, they just lost to a common opponent 35-6, and then Rhode Island beats that opponent by 10, and then you put them not just ahead of Rhode Island, but explicitly one spot ahead. Being behind Richmond, I can understand, but Villanova by just one spot, and you beat it in the common opponent. There's also a 3-loss team in the top 8. I mean, it doesn't make sense to me, and I think that's part of the reason why we saw in the FCS news cycle in the past couple of days that the playoff committee is going to stop considering these media polls when they do their, picking for who's in the playoffs and who's not.
Yeah, well, the good thing is that the Rams are no longer behind Richmond. We're actually tied with them right now in the CAA polls, both teams being the record they are, but after last week's results, there's only a few teams that only have one loss in the CAA, that being Delaware, Stony Brook, and Villanova, with just one loss in CAA.
It's also worth noting that the criteria for the FCS playoff committee will be utilizing is not to include the polls, but rather unbiased statistical data such as KPI, Macy ratings, and ESPN's Football Power Index. It'll further solidify the selection criteria as the FCS playoff committee steers away from the poll system that has displayed bias in the past. Pretty much everything that you just touched on
it definitely contributes in a way that is not, positive for some teams. I think Rhode Island definitely being one of those teams, and I think straying away from something like this could be used to Rhode Island's advantage and something that could help them in these pool-based, voting systems for sure.
Yeah, and Rhode Island I'm not sure how the KPI system works. I don't think any of us do, but and it's kind of scary, honestly. But you don't know how it works. It's all mathematical based, so you don't know what stat it's going to be that could cause Rhode Island to drop from third right now, third in that poll, which is kind of unbelievable, to wherever they might drop if they were to drop a game later down the season. But like you said, Emily, I prefer that they use these analytical data points. It's kind of similar to how the NCAA March Madness Committee will use KenPom more than they will use the AP poll. Obviously, top 25 teams in the AP poll are going to make a 64-team bracket, but it's different at the FCS level where there's only 8 automatic bids and then 16 at large. And so how do you make that decision? And we've seen this decision, this committee kind of screw over Rhode Island in the past. We talked about it in 2022. Rhode Island was 5th in the CAA at the end of the year, and they didn't make it. But 6th place Delaware got it. You put a team that was quite literally below Rhode Island in the conference standings ahead of them into the postseason. So it's nice to see that the playoff committee is starting to change the way that they're doing things. And today I saw some bracketology article about the FCS playoffs, and they have Rhode Island right now as a potential to host a playoff game, but it looks right now, if this person who made this random bracket were to be correct, that we might be hosting a playoff game against somebody along the likes of interconference opponent Stony Brook. So I think that this change in the way that they're doing things will certainly be beneficial to Rhode Island, who we have talked about it multiple times on the show, seem to be kind of discredited by these media polls.
Yeah. And at the end of the day, stats are stats. You can't deny stats. You can't deny performance. You can't deny numbers. And as much as, numbers aren't the only thing, I think going more of an analytical route will just be get rid of that bias, get rid of just favoritism, get rid of all that, because as I said, you can't deny numbers. If you have a team that is statistically better than one another, as I said, it's not the only thing that will determine how good a team is, how playoff worthy a team is, but it is definitely something that would be able to kind of, I guess, emphasize, which teams should be there and which teams should not, because you can't deny numbers. All right, and now we're going to transition into the possibility of URI becoming a football school. This is not something that, at least in my 4 years here, has ever really been, a consideration. So having this kind of be a topic of conversation is super exciting. There was such high energy at Meade Stadium from a sellout, 5,450 person crowd for homecoming 2024. The energy was off the charts. Kingston was feeding off this energy of the Rams now on their 6-game winning streak. The Rams came into this game ranked 15-16 as their historic start continues, and more than triple the capacity of the stadium around for the tailgate festivities was beforehand. And that, I think, is super cool. Something that I have never felt as a student here, and it is truly awesome to see this team kind of climbing in the ranks and just being elevated to that next level, and something that I hope for as a student here at URI. So I'm really excited for that.
Yeah, I mean, the Ruckus got after it, right? I mean, they were definitely causing some issues for the other team, a little miscommunication, causing some ruckus, one would say. The energy from that crowd definitely feeds into this Rams defense, though.
Yeah, I mean, when did you ever think that Meade Stadium would be the kind of place that you go to and you can't get a play call off, right? You can't communicate to your wide receivers, can't make audibles. I mean, it's a nice-looking stadium, but we all know the bleachers are – there's a reason that there's plans to have them renovated and an increase in capacity. So even with what limited space the Rams are currently working with as we wait for those new, bleachers and whatnot to be set up, they're doing a lot with what you could describe as a little. And, head coach Jim Fleming has described this environment at Meade Stadium as one of the most difficult places to play in the CAA. And I think Rhode Island can take a lot of pride in that. And Jim Fleming's been around the conference for a while. So whatever he says about the CAA is almost definitely the truth. So game day is only going to get better here in Kingston, Rhode Island. Last year we saw the new video board go up, so it's been great to see that at every home game. The replays have just made life a lot easier. If you're a fan and you happen to miss just one play. And like I said, in the future we will see some renovations to the home side stands. They'll be expanded in size with all of it. They'll have an updated press box, which
Thank
I know
God.
all of us are looking forward to.
God. Need an elevator.
Yeah. I mean, it just gets scary
It's
up
all
there.
features.
It's scary.
But hey, with all these renovations, right? The environment now, like you said, Jim Plumbing referred to it as the best environment in CAA. If this trend continues and our stadium only gets improved and bigger, more fans, who knows how impactful this group could be.
I know. I mean, if you're able to keep up this on the field success and you keep it going through these renovations, it will do a lot for this team. I mean, you could draw comparisons to like the Clippers. They just got a brand new arena. There's
the wall, man.
The wall, right? There's a lot of news about that, and there's a lot of news in the offseason about why it was important for them to bring back certain players on that team because those guys are good, and that's going to lead to a decent team, and that will only make that stadium, more grand. And that's what you want for Rhode Island. You want the team to be as good as possible when the new stadium is finished that way. I guess I shouldn't say new stadium, but when those big renovations are completed, it'll be worth it, really, because you don't want to be in a bad position when those brand new bleachers come up and you're not able to put, butts in seats because the team isn't as great as it is this season. So it's important that Rhode Island continues to build upon this.
Monmouth's going to be coming from New Jersey for Rhode Island's family weekend. The hottest ticket in the state has been sold out for multiple weeks now. Monmouth has one of the most electrifying offenses in not just the CAA, but FCS as a whole. They're coming off of one of their only losses of the season, 26-14 loss against Towson, the first game that they have scored under 27 points the entire year. The Hawks own a 2-2 record in the CAA, having lost to Delaware, as well as Towson, as previously mentioned. Monmouth cannot be overlooked, though, right? I mean, this team has had notable wins against Maine, Fordham, Bryant, and above all else, their first FBS win in program history against Florida International in September. It's a tough opponent for sure.
Yeah, and so you talked a lot about how prolific this offense is, and if you watch this show on a weekly basis, I've kind of been hinting at this throughout the weeks. I think this is a really, really big game for Rhode Island because Monmouth represents a lot of things that Rhode Island has struggled with in the past, and that's why this new and improved great defense that we have is so important this season. So it's almost in crazy to say, but they average 40 points a game. 40 points. You said that loss they just had at Townsend was their first time this season scoring below 27. Well, it was just their second time scoring below 30. Like that's just a wild stat. They average about 500 yards per game, but they give up about 422 yards per game, and it's hard to know unless you really break down the film if that is just because the offense is always scoring, so the defense is getting tired, and the other opponent's offense is getting a lot of opportunities, or really because the defense they have is not good, right? So they have a equally dominant running and passing game. Earlier this season, it was more so that passing attack, and I think that's really how they get the majority of their yards is through that passing attack, but their rushing attack is just as deadly with about 180 rushing yards per game, and then about 325 passing yards per game as well.
So opponents have proven time and time again that the Hawks will aim to outscore teams, as their defense has been inconsistent at preventing offenses from being equally as successful. As we mentioned, that defense, they let up a lot of yards. That offense, they are so good, that Monmouth offense. And if you're Rhode Island, I would look at all of the film from last week. Towson held them to just 14 points. You implement the same exact game plan, and you go at it. Monmouth is going to make changes. Being held to 14 points, under 27 for the first time all year is going to warrant some changes in practice. Might see different play calling. Change it up a little bit. Whatever their scheme is, whatever they decide to do. But you've got to look at what Towson did and really, really look hard at what you can do similarly to what they did.
Yeah, if you want to compare them to a certain NFL quarterback, it would be Jameis Winston back in 2019. 5,000 yards, 30 touchdowns, 30 picks to back off it. So like you said, definitely a give and take kind of thing, but if the Rams can limit that offense, that'd be great. You guys like that reference? I can see you cheesing a little bit.
That took me a little bit by surprise. Derek Robertson, quarterback over there for Monmouth, the UMaine transfer, as great as he is, I'd say he's a little less turnover prone than
I'm calling Monmouth as a team. Why don't we just get into the players?
Yeah.
There are some individuals that the Rams should be watching out for, one of which is quarterback Derek Robertson. He does have 2,579 passing yards on the season, as well as 21 passing touchdowns and 6 interceptions. Another one is the running back, Son Nato. He has 360 rushing yards and 18 rushing touchdowns with 4.9 yards per carry, as well as wide receiver Josh Derry. He has 36 receptions, 602 receiving yards, and 4 touchdowns on the season, as well as D lineman Justin O'Bannon. He has 17 total tackles, 4.5 total tackles for a loss, and 1.5 sacks. And last but not least, linebacker Sam Corpy. He has 44 total tackles, 1.5 tackles for loss, 1 sack, and 3 pass breakups. So the Rams really need to watch out for these guys.
Yeah, they got a lot of impact players on that team, and I think the notable one, like I just mentioned, is Robertson, the quarterback, being the UMaine transfer, has experience against Rhode Island, and then their running back, 18 rushing touchdowns on just 300, and I think it was 20 or 360 yards. It's
ridiculous.
A touchdown for every 20 yards.
What are we like?
Like,
I asked our producer if that was actually a typo or not. 18 touchdowns is ridiculous. So those are definitely some players the Rams are going to have to watch out for this coming Saturday.
Thank God for the front seven of the Rams this year. Dude, they have a challenge this week. 18 rushing.
Just I had Silver for O-line, and now the biggest challenge this year.
Right. We talked about it. The trenches have been so great for Rhode Island this season, but they truly have their toughest test coming up this week against the Monmouth Hawks.
Yeah, they do.
Thank you all for tuning in to today's episode of Rhody Beat Report. This is Alexa Baker, joined here by Justin Therio, Zach Petrick, and Peter Gigliotti. Tune in next week as the Rams head back on the road in their toughest matchup yet in the 2024 season against the Delaware Blue Hens.